Before I start, I just want to say that this is one of those videos in my line of, I don't have this console, it's just gone on sale, but if you're considering buying one of these things, what do you need to know, and what market position is this in? So this isn't a review, it's a thought experiment. And if I call it an experiment, then I don't actually have to take responsibility when something goes horribly wrong. What I'm going to do here is use my marketing knowledge. Now, I know you wouldn't expect that from a guy who handles Chinese boxes on the internet, but I actually have quite extensive marketing knowledge, all taken from the big boy's book of behavioral economics. I'm going to be using that to take a look at the position of the RG Vita and RG Vita Pro and who its ideal customers might actually be. I would love to take a look at the actual units themselves if I can get hold of them at any point, but unfortunately, I'm not one of those YouTubers who Anbernic pre-releases units to. I'm not upset. I'm just disappointed. Earlier in the year, I took a look at the RGDS, a console that I think everybody got wrong when it first came out, partly because reviewers got units that had pretty janky software, and partly because the specs seemed to suggest that it wouldn't play the DS games that people wanted. But the RGDS has been through a bit of a renaissance. It moved to Florence, opened a workshop, spent most of its time perfecting the use of linear perspective, opened an account with the Medici family, and started complaining that the Sistine Chapel doesn't have proper integer scaling. And yet, after all of that, it still struggles to play Assassin's Creed. But as the dust settles, and as custom firmware has been released, you have to admit that this is a console that can now do the job that it was meant for. It plays DS games and it plays them well. People who've bought this unit seem to be very happy with it. But no matter what we want, the next name to be pulled out of Anbernic's bag of nostalgia isn't going to be doing the job that's printed on its box. The Anbernic RG Vita and Vita Pro are both up for sale right now. We've missed the early bird window, that 3-day panic attack that everybody has when Anbernic releases a product just so that you can save $10. But you could still probably get this with some sort of discount if you shop around on AliExpress and you're willing to wait until the planets align. Without linear planet planning, you'll be relying on Anbernic's own website, which has this listed for $109.99 for the base model and $149.99 for the Pro model. And like all Anbernic products, that's going to come with a chunk of money added on for shipping and taxes. That is a lot of money to shell out. And the shell might be the one thing that this device actually has going for it. It's got an all-glass front, I know some people don't like that, and the familiar PlayStation Vita silhouette, and the sort of controls that you would expect from an Anbernic device. And I've got to clearly state my biases here, because I've got quite a few Anbernic devices at this point and I really like them. I've never had a bad experience with an Anbernic device, and my recent videos exploring the 476H, 477M and 477V have brought people to my reviews who seem to just have a wonderful time with their units and love them. So I'm predisposed to like this thing. I'm also predisposed to go out and buy one of these units, and yet I haven't. And so if somebody like me, somebody who has a vested interest in buying or acquiring every single Anbernic product so that I can review them on this channel, doesn't actually go out and buy this device, then you have to ask, who is this really for? Is this a device that you wouldn't bet your life on, or should you jump in with both Vita? The RG Vita is a bit of a conundrum. You've got a base model that runs a Unisoc T618 chip with 3GB of RAM and a 720p IPS screen, and then the Pro, which is the Rockchip RK3576, 4GB of RAM and a 1080p screen. And you've also got the ability to dual boot between Android and Linux on the Pro model. Now, the T618 chip isn't anything new. It's been in so many Anbernic devices at this point, it's starting to develop Stockholm Syndrome. Coming onto the market as it has, the Vita is one of the cheaper iterations of a handheld with this chipset, and it's a chip that's been praised by a lot of people, even giving you the ability to run a very tiny smattering of GameCube and PS2 games, although you'll only get the lightest of light titles running here, and that's only if you're standing downwind. But that does mean that it's going to handle PSP and below incredibly well, and I'm not the first person to suggest that the Vita probably should have been called the Anbernic RG PSP. But there's a particular arthropod in the unguent here. All of the other T618 devices we've seen so far have had 4 gig of RAM. This one has 3, which I'm sure has been done to stave off the excesses of the RAM-pocalypse, but it could mean that a good number of games that were viable on previous devices won't work here, or maybe won't work quite as well. In fact, Retro Handhelds tried to benchmark this, and like a sleep-deprived Amazon driver on his way to the last run of the evening, it crashed halfway, which is quite disappointing for a device that you're paying over $100 for. The Pro, on the other hand, is genuinely new territory, running the RK3576 processor, which has got 4 performance cores. I think that means that it's capable of acting, singing, juggling, and contemporary dance. This sits meaningfully above the T618 on paper, but crucially below the T820 that we've all come to know and love from previous Anbernic devices. Early benchmarks suggest that it's going to be able to handle some GameCube and PS2 at higher resolutions, but if you approach it too quickly and you look it in the eye, you just might scare it off. So both of these devices are excellent PSP machines. One of them should be able to dabble in a few more PS2 and GameCube games than devices like the Ayaneo Pocket Air Mini or the Mangmi Air X. The other is actually kind of on par with both of those devices. Both will play a smattering of Vita games, although not many. And that's not entirely the fault of the hardware. Vita 3K is still in early development. There's a good chunk of the Vita catalogue that it takes a look at and then just runs away screaming. But even if every Vita game was emulatable, you'd still need something like a high-end Snapdragon processor in order to get the best out of them. Stacking it up against the Mangmi Air X and the Ayaneo Pocket Air Mini, the base model actually sits between the two. It should be able to play around about the same titles as those two consoles, and yeah, that does mean that smattering of PS2 and GameCube titles. When you take that into consideration, the base model isn't actually that badly priced. You do miss out on the analog triggers of the other devices, but in return, you get the more authentic PS Vita style experience. I can't help feeling that the PS Vita style experience actually sounds like some sort of ELO tribute act. So you might think that the Pro model is sitting in a really good place as well, but that might not be the case. See, the Pro model is slap bang on that $150 price point, which means that it's way over the $100 price cap that many people place on their consoles. The base model can kind of get around this if you can find some discounts on AliExpress, but the Pro model can't. It's going to be up against Anbernic's own 476H, which is a lot more powerful, and even the Retroid Pocket 5, which is only $50 more, and yet can play an awful lot more games from an awful lot more systems. Even newer announced devices already seem to be nipping at its heels. The Magic X2 Dream Pro, for example, has a Dimensity 7300 chip in it, Hall effect controls, and a track record from a company that's been known to be a bit of a disruptor in the market. And this looks like it might be a bit of a flagship for the company as well. You could say they've put all their X in one basket. Originally, the Pro was the model that I was most interested in. It's another powerful Android device from Anbernic in a year which for me has been filled with powerful Android devices by Anbernic. But it looks like the Pro may have scattered its seed on stony ground. I've seen a few people say that they actually prefer the idea of the base model over the Pro because they want something that is relatively cheap, tinkerable, not entirely sure that that's a word, but we'll go with it anyway, and with that Vita form factor. In terms of higher-end gaming performance, some very liberal estimates suggest that around about 60% of the PS2 and GameCube catalogue might work on the base, and maybe 70% on the Pro. And you're probably going to be stuck to playing games that are so light they're suffering from malnutrition. So where does this leave us? Well, the Anbernic RG Vita and Vita Pro are two consoles that are hampered by their own name. There is an expectation when you name something after a popular system that it's going to be able to play the games of that popular system. And that was never, ever going to be the case with these devices. Nevertheless, what they can play is actually quite interesting, and it looks like the base model at least is going to hold its own with similar devices around the same price point. The Pro, on the other hand, faces stiff competition from devices that are not that much more expensive than it, especially when you take into account the shipping and taxes that are plastered on after you click the buy button. It wouldn't surprise me if some people reach the checkout and then decide to ditch the Pro model for, I don't know, something like the Retroid Pocket 5 instead. I didn't pick one of these up because, quite frankly, I don't have the money to do it. I'm saving for the TrimUI Brick Pro and the Magic X2 Dream Pro because both of those are coming later in the year. Not too long to go for both of them, I don't think. It's not that the Vita models are bad devices at all. It's more that they're not as interesting. But all of my market research turned up something that I actually wasn't expecting. The base model of this has something going for it. That Vita form factor is something that people have been looking for a very, very long time. TrimUI has got away with the Smart Pro and Smart Pro S for some time because they kind of mirror that form factor better than anything else that was on the market before. Now, Anbernic are coming along now, and they are the kings of making things that look and feel like other things. There will be people who are buying this just because it's got the Vita form factor and performance up to PSP, with what should be 2x resolution. And that means on lower end systems, we should have enough headroom to push the system a little bit in, add some nice shaders as well. And that actually is a real selling point for a lot of people. If you're the sort of person who is desperate for that PS Vita form factor, then it looks like the base model might be good enough for you. You're not going to need it for GameCube and PS2 games that really need that 4:3 aspect ratio. But for PSP, which should be really good on this, and for the price point that it sits around, the $100 mark, it looks like you're going to be getting a good device that's fun to tinker with. The Pro, on the other hand, is much more difficult to recommend. If you want extra headroom into GameCube and PS2 games as an occasional bonus rather than the main reason for buying the console, and you're happy with a device that has the right form factor but will play less than other devices around the same price point, then you might find the Pro a good option. On the few Vita games that it will play, it should run pretty well. But to be honest, I wouldn't buy either of these if you truly wanted Vita emulation. More powerful chips will do it better, and even then they're going to struggle to play a good portion of the catalogue. I would have loved to have taken a look at the actual hardware, and somewhere down the road, I might see if I can do that anyway. Despite my misgivings, these are both very interesting devices, and with custom firmware and a little bit of community backing, they might find their place in the retro handheld pantheon at some point in the near future. But that's what I think anyway, and I would love to know what you think in the comments below. Let me know whether the RG Vita is something that's on your list or something that you're going to avoid. And whilst you're down there, please do leave a like and hit the subscribe button as well. I'm told that you can now pay me money to say thank you, which makes me feel a little bit like a posh waiter who's just brought you a salad at a very, very high-end restaurant. But that's it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. And until next time, thank you ever so much for coming along and watching. And of course, happy gaming.